Welcome back to EventSpeak with me, Big John, CEO of Beyond Experiential. We're the interview show that lives on the EventSpeak network, that network that exists for all you folks out there that call the event business, in whatever capacity of it you live in, home. Today's guest is a very dear friend of mine that I haven't seen in quite some time. We've lived on Warped Tour together a couple different years, which anybody that's out there watching this knows that's a very special moment. That's like going through boot camp together. She worked on the road for years, touring for Disney. She is now, like most of us, kind of rethinking how we're, supposed to get off the road. As Kevin Lemon once said to me, your first day on the road is the first day you got to figure out how to get off of it. Well, Rachel is doing a phenomenal job of that, hosting two different shows, a streaming show called Movies, Music, and Mayhem that lives on YouTube, and then something very exciting that we were just talking about off camera, a show that's called Movie Trivia Schmoedown. It's got a couple of heavyweights involved in it, but we're going to talk about all of that more in just a second with her as she's joining us right now. Rachel Silvestrini, nice to have you back. How you doing, girl?
Hi, guys. Sorry, you froze there for a second. I was like, no, I'm missing my intro. Of course, that's very much like me. So,
it's funny because we're, as we're all living in COVID-19 life, Zoom is the new standard. And I feel like we're able to forgive those little things where we get little frozen pieces and parts because everybody's, I'm at home, you're at home, we're having this conversation virtually. And, as funny as I was doing my bit there, I'm catching on my peripheral vision. It's like, your connection is unstable. I'm like, of course it is. It's not the only thing that's unstable these days. Anyways, Rachel,
That's sweet.
how have you been? Tell me, tell me what's going on in your life. What have you been up to? We'll do the Wikipedia version as we were talking off camera, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. But now that you're essentially, kind of transitioned off the road where you lived for quite some time, you got a couple cool things going on. Let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me about what you're up to these days.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I was introduced to this thing called the Movie Trivia Schmoedown, which is like the most insane, wonderful group of human beings you could ever hope to be a part of. And what it is basically is the first sentence, I discovered this at WonderCon of 2017. And the panel, the first sentence of the panel description was, have you ever wondered what movie trivia would be like with the theatrics of WWE and the competitiveness of UFC? And I was like, tell me everything. And then I walked into the panel and people were getting introduced and there was lights and music and people were booing and cheering and they had like wrestling belts instead of trophies. And it was everything I ever wanted in my life. So fast forward a few years and I am now a competitor. They have a singles division, a teams division, an inner geekdom, and a Star Wars division. And so I've been competing for about a year and a half, and it is all of the fun you could ever imagine. It's just nerds getting together, and there's factions and bad guys and heels and faces, and it's...
Wait, hold on. So I didn't catch that part when we were kind of talking before we started recording. So it's movie trivia meets professional wrestling, which makes sense because you've got some heavyweights involved here. Chris Jericho, Doug Benson, Kevin Smith. How did you manage to get involved in this?
So Doug and Kevin and Chris are brand new to the league. We just got them in about 2 weeks ago on a free agency draft because we are making this more and more sports-like. So they just got involved, but I basically I hopped in at the perfect time because there weren't a lot of females that competed because the show is held on YouTube, and females tend to get dragged for the smallest increments of anything of not being perfect. And so there was like 3 or 4 female competitors at the time. And during the panel at WonderCon, they were doing like this, and I ended up sitting front row somehow. And they were doing a speed round of trivia. And so they were, at every question that was asked, I was like, I know this one. I know this one. I know this one. And so at the end of it, one of the guys that was sitting like almost directly in front of me came up to me and was like, "Hey, you ever thought of competing?" And I was like, "Yeah, that sounds awesome." But I happened to be there while I was on tour. So I got, Christian Harloff's contact information and basically stalked him and everybody involved on Twitter and Facebook until I was finally back in LA and, was able to come to tapings and then got comfortable with the format and now I'm competing and calling out people and smack talking on Twitter and making promos.
Wow.
My roommates are all involved in the show and one of them just got traded to another faction, so we're like battling on Twitter, and people are like, "You guys live together. You should probably calm down." I'm like, "No, it's okay. This is just tip of the iceberg."
It's all shtick. It's all shtick.
It's all shtick. It's all fun.
That is something. I'm not just saying this because you're talking to me now on my show. I'm like, I gotta check this out. I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that, and that sounds really fun. Now I have to ask you, as obviously does that tie into the streaming show that you're also hosting on YouTube, the movies, music, and mayhem, or is that kind of a separate thing?
It does. There's a lot of people that are involved in the industry, like aside from Doug, Kevin, and Chris. Sam Levine is involved, and he is of Freaks and Geek fame. He was also in Inglourious Bastards. He was one of our competitors. He's an ex-champ. Now he is a manager of one of the factions of the Usual Suspects. We have people who are massively involved in the editing and writers and people that are involved in the comic world. So it's LA, so everybody's involved in the industry in some form. And so I just kind of figured, I have a lot of time on my hands, and one of my favorite things, yeah, right? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things about movies is the music that comes into them, which you know how much I love music. We met on Warped Tour, and so I just figured, it might be a fun little crossover to be able to pull in, to have a show where I can talk to some of my favorite people on Earth and bring them in on and have a common show that everybody can relate to. So I've been pulling from the Schmoedown. I've had Andy Glass from We Came as Romans on. He was my very first guest. He was very sweet to do that. And so we got, I'm just pulling people in from all different aspects of life. And I'm going to have some people in from my Broadway days and have them in, and we'll talk musicals, and, everybody's a movie fan, so it's a nice conglomeration of this is who I am and these are my favorite people, so come watch us hang out and get drunk and stupid and laugh our asses off.
That sounds like so much fun, and I totally get it. I mean, obviously, what we're doing here on EventSpeak, this little show is different, but it's about this. It's like, you're a dear friend, and we're having a conversation, and you invite people in to kind of sit in that conversation, and it's always fun when you can splice it up with fun things like trivia or alcohol or whatever the case is. Now, before you got into obviously just being a trivia movie, wrestling, hanging out with superstar force of nature that you are, I will say, as someone that managed you on the road, you're a very hard worker. You probably one of the best I've met when it came down to networking and being tenacious. You absolutely made up your mind you were going to get out on Warped Tour, and went out there and stalked around in 2005, and it took you a little while, but then you did. You not only got out there, you went out there for a good chunk of years. I think there's a lot of young people out there that are watching right now that want to do those sort of things, and want to be able to do the kind of stuff that you've done. Do you have any advice to these young folks that are thinking about hey, I want to go on tour. Hey, I want to do this. I want to do that. What kind of advice would you offer them?
It's the simplest thing. Ask. Talk to people. The reason that I got out on Warped Tour, I'm not even joking, is because I was having a drink next to Kevin Lyman at a pre-Warped Tour event for a nonprofit that I worked for. It was at the Viper Room. It was right before the 2005. And we literally stood shoulder to shoulder watching a Japanese punk rock band perform at the Viper. And they ended, I realized my drink was empty, and then realized I was standing next to Kevin Lyman. Approached him with the idea of having a massage therapist in reverse daycare. He loved the idea. He gave me a trial for California. And the rest is history. Like, you never know. Like, I could have been like, oh my God, it's Kevin Lyman, I'm not going to talk to him. But you have to. Like, you have to just ask. Like, every time you don't ask, the answer is always no.
Well said. That's, folks, take it from me. That's some solid advice. Kevin, of course, a mutual dear friend, was on EventSpeak. We had him on a couple weeks ago. And, I think that actually, this is something I didn't realize until we were just talking about it now, when Kevin and I were kind of doing the pre-interview. One of the things that he brought up, and something he was very proud of, was the creation and addition of reverse daycare onto the Warped Tour. And for folks out there, Rachel, that didn't know what that is, obviously Warped is no longer with us. Sad. But can you tell people that don't know, what was reverse daycare on the band's Warped Tour?
Sorry, you froze again. Reverse daycare was a tent that was completely enclosed. It had air conditioning and endless water, and it was for the parents. So like, if you had like a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old child that wanted to go to Warped Tour, but you were like, place is a den of craziness, you were able to come in with your child, usually for free up to a certain age point. Your kids could go run off, and you would get dropped off at the tent and get to hang out and watch movies. And we had camping chairs, and I was a massage therapist in there. And you just kind of got to hang out. And it was like the most amazing way to bring in a new generation of kids into the space and expose them to bands and to causes and nonprofits and, marketing materials that they probably never would have gotten exposed to had they not been able to come to Warped Tour. So it was just kind of like a hangout place for parents. But it was a blast. I loved working in there.
I used to sneak over and visit you any chance I got. Number one, because it was like, it's you. And number two, there was air conditioning. So it's like, it was nice to get out of the heat of wherever we were at the time. So, with that being said, I know then you ended up doing merchandising for Disney for quite some time, right? I think you worked on multiple tours for them. Tell us a little bit about your Broadway experience and being a merchandiser and what that was like for you.
Yeah, so I ended up working for Disney Theatrical Group for 5 seasons. It's very much like school years. They start in the fall and they usually end in the summertime. And I was out mainly with Beauty and the Beast for those 5 years. And then in those 5 years, I got the opportunity to work every show that they had on Broadway. I subbed in on every tour that they had out. So Lion King, Lion King, Newsies. Actually, I think I did work Aladdin for a little bit. It blurs together. But I got to work, it really does. But I got, Mary Poppins, both on Broadway and on tour. It was a really amazing experience getting to work for a company that cares so much about the product and in turn so much about their employees for being able to, like, you can't have a pissed off Disney employee on tour. You can't. So they took really good care of us, and it was a company I feel honored to have worked for. But it was hard.
Awesome. That's good to hear. That's good to hear that, I've heard various stories. I mean, everyone's got their different version of whoever they work for, right? But let me ask you this. Now that you are at a point where a lot of folks get that are tour vets, have got a lot of, tours under their belts, and you're kind of, granted, we're all in the same position with COVID-19. We're like, okay, you're home now. But it sounds like, not unlike myself a few years ago, you were at that point where you're like, all right, well, I gotta start thinking about not being on the road all the time. That's a scary experience for a lot of people. Would you say that for you, it was a thing where you found yourself kind of embracing that, mystery, or was it an overwhelming experience for you before you, as you mentioned off camera, you still ended up doing a few one-off things and went out with John Leguizamo and still managed to get out there on the road a little bit. But how was that overall experience for you? Is it was it something, would you say that was very scary for you, or was it something that was an easier transition?
I thought that it was going to be a little more difficult. Like, there are some aspects about normal life that I'm still trying to get used to after almost 2 years of not living on the road, mainly grocery shopping. Because for the last 7 years that I was living on the road, I was on the road 9 to 10 months out of the year. So it was very much I did not really have a home. 1 year I was home 32 days out of the entire year. Like 32 nights I slept in my own bed out of 365. So it was a lot of on the road. It wasn't just like a 6-week tour here and then like 4 weeks off. It was like 7 months and then like a week and then like 2 more months. And then you have like 6 weeks off between legs of the tour. So it was incredibly intensive touring with Broadway shows that way. But I decided that I was going to give myself an entire year from the date that I moved back down to LA, which was July 7th or July 6th. And I wanted to give myself that full year just to see if I really wanted, like, if what I thought I was missing by living on the road was real and it was something that I wanted to have be my everyday life. Or if I was just going to go stir crazy 3 months in and like bang on someone's door being like, hire me, let me live on the road again. I have my bags packed. And it turned out to be something that I adapted to quite easily. I was really excited to get to see my friends, my family. I mean, there are friends of mine that I used to see a lot more because I used to travel to their cities and get to see them on a regular basis that I very dearly miss. But I mean, I love being able to sleep in my own bed at the end of the night. I love knowing exactly where my TV remote is and who was the last person to touch it, you know?
I do know, and I think that you just made a very key point, and that would be, I think, advice I would share with anyone, is that you can't be afraid to roll the dice and take a step back, or what feels like a step back. You said that you took that year off in order to be able to take bigger steps forward, because when Kevin first said that to me, it was around 2007, and my friend and I were at his house for dinner. We were both Warped Tour people, and he called it. He's like, so you guys, are you probably making about this much a week now? We're like, yeah. And he's like, it's good. He's like, but so what's next? I'm like, well, we just got done with Warp. He's like, well, no, I don't get that. But, your first day on the road is the first day you got to figure out how to get off of it. I'm like, well, what? Wait, why would I do that? Like, at the time it was, come on, like, this is fantastic. Now, the level you were traveling, I mean, that's extreme. Like, that's even by my standards, where when I was working full time as a tour manager, you go out for 6 to 8, maybe 12 weeks, come home for a month, winch, wash, repeat 3-4 times throughout the year. And then, you're good to go. That's a rare thing to come through. So, like, props to you, Rachel, that you were able to like step away from that to reinvent yourself. That's like rethinking living, for that matter. But it also, I think you would agree, probably just gives you such an appreciation to be able to have a place you call home, and a couch, and a bed, and a kitchen, and the ability
to cook,
the ability to get to cook and take care of yourself. And and for that matter, as we're wrapping up here, Rachel, actually, you're not too far from me, so let's make a point here in LA to get together and break bread together sometime, my friend. It's so wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your experiences with us. For the folks at home that are interested to check out the Schmoedown and your other show, Movies, Music, and Mayhem, you will see under Rachel appear here because of the amazing Chris at Loxamana Media that will tell you where you can find her. But if you just YouTube Rachel Silvestrini, you will find you and your shows on there, correct?
Yes. And if you're looking for the Schmoedown, you can just search Schmoedown. It's SCHMOEDOWN. we've got we're in our 7th season. We're starting our Star Wars tournament soon. Our Inner Geekdom tournament starting in a few weeks. It's a crazy community, but so welcoming and so lovely and wonderful, and just the perfect insanity to dive into, especially right now. So.
Well said. Well, Rachel, from the bottom of my heart, it does me good to see you again and to see that you're doing so well. Thank you for coming on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel Silvestrini, thank you for coming by. This has been EventSpeak, the network that exists to support the event community. www.eventspeak.com is where you find us. It's a social platform, but it's also a network, and not just a network in the sense of, hey, we've got this show with Big John that we're all watching right now, but a network for the event community to come together in solidarity and have a common voice to help navigate these difficult times and find out fascinating things. Like there's movie trivia that people like Kevin Smith do with guys like Chris Jericho and evidently Rachel. And it sounds fantastic and fabulous. You have to check that out. But we will see you guys next time on the next episode of EventSpeak. But until that time, please take care of yourselves and each other.